Hello and welcome to Unlikely Leadership with Audrey, and today's guest is awesome. He's the author of The Broken CEO, How to Be the Leader You Always Wanted to Be. And he spent the last 15 years working with CEOs, directors, and senior managers from every sector, including FTSE 100s, government, academia, SMEs, and nonprofits. He delivers leadership development programs and coaching through his company Clarity Space to accelerate leaders' evolution through self-awareness and self-leadership. Chris has set up and run businesses in the UK and overseas, originally qualifying as a chartered engineer. He's written for Forbes, People Management, and Management Today, and delivered seminars and workshops for the Institute of Directors. Let's get into this conversation with Chris. I'm so excited that you have been housed inside of and been interacting with people, because I have a list of questions for you just off the top of my head, because, you know, the focus of this show, Unlikely Leadership, is a very timely one, because we're in a paradigm shift with regards to leadership. And so much of the behavior from everyone in the industries, all industries, knowing and discussing solidly for the past 6 to 8 years about remote work life and needing to set it up and needing to make it a priority. And, you know, CEOs not wanting that, a majority of CEOs not wanting that, to bad behavior that's been overlooked because those CEOs produce bottom line results. And there's just so much being revealed, I would say, around not only the very myopic form and design of leadership, top down, can be aggressive, zero-sum game, all of those things that we've known to come and find ourselves inside of it. And even for those of us that didn't agree with it, looking around and seeing people's response to that type of leadership, which is I would say the moral majority, has been inside and behind that leadership. And almost all of our constructs, be they marketing, sales, anywhere where you look, communication, are inside of that thought of leadership as CEOs are. And now we're at this point where it's not a matter of whether or not you want to change. It's kind of revealing to everybody you have to change. And that this is a time in history where we are these chinks in the infrastructure or the architecture, so to speak, are widening. And they're really widening by the masses being able to step up and say, no, that's not okay. No, I don't think that was authentic. Hey, wait a minute. Where are, where's the diversity in your organization or on your board, or any number of things that people are organizing themselves around, holding CEOs accountable, holding leaders accountable. So I first, when I saw what you were up to and your book, and love the title, by the way, Broken CEO, I thought to myself, my goodness, this guy is psychic, because he wrote something that is like at the perfect point in history. But of course, you did this before we went through a major change, before this came to the crystallization that it's come to. So my first question out of the gate is, how is it for you, having made that bold statement, Broken CEO, and then seeing it actually break?
Let me put it this way. I'm less impressed than you are, clearly, about the timing of it. I didn't sit back and think, gosh, I've really hit the nail on the head here. I think it was just a creeping realization that our attitudes towards leadership, as you've nicely outlined, are dysfunctional. At the moment, there's a big disconnect between the leadership people are kind of doling out and what people really want deep down. I think the situation we're referring to here is COVID and the lockdown that came out of that. What that's done is really to accelerate what was happening anyway, I think. All the seeds were there, the desire was there, but there wasn't the momentum, and the the lockdown, the pandemic has catalyzed everything and allowed people to make choices that they weren't empowered to make before. And they've managed now to wrest that balance of power, wrest with a W, I should say, away from the kind of centralized leadership that we've had. And people are enjoying the discretion that they have over some of the aspects of how they work. So in a funny kind of way, it really is a new age that we're entering, which I have to admit, I'd like to say I foresaw it. Absolutely, I didn't. It was just a happy coincidence, I think.
Well, it was a perfect one, and this type of material, much like yourself, is what I'm on the hunt for. Not just all different kinds of expressions of leaders stepping up and saying, "Hey, I'm starting to notice this kind of way of being or this interaction doesn't work for me anymore. It doesn't sit well as I evolve as a human being." And many leaders were finding themselves uncomfortable in the cloak that was a CEO and leadership, and have been in the midst of kind of wiggling themselves out, if you will, and doing the work. But now with this level of agreement on the side of change, yes, this is an accelerator for sure. And tell me first off, especially since you thought of this before the pandemic, before George Floyd, before all of this, a captive audience of all of us being locked down and really re-examining, what is my life about? What am I doing with my career? This is what I'm spending my time on. Is this worth my life now that it's put right up in my face that it is in jeopardy? And tell me, before you even got to that point, what were you asserting was broken with the CEO?
I think what was broken, what was missing, was this bigger perspective, this bigger view of why we work and why we put our efforts into the things that we do. And I was brought up very much on a traditional work ethic that you have to work, you have to pay the bills, you do that for your working life, and then you retire on the spoils if you're lucky. And first off, I noticed that for some people, they got to the end of that cycle, they retired, and they didn't have a great deal of time to enjoy the spoils.
Right.
And it kind of dawned on me over the years that, and I think I've always felt this deep down, that we can have our cake and eat it. You can do something valuable, fun, and exciting in the world. You can make a real contribution, and you can get paid for it. Now, it's taken me a while to put that into practice, but it's very much my experience now, and my feeling is that it can be like that for everyone, providing that you manage to jettison some of the thinking that our society has kind of put on our shoulders, and that our parents have given us as an inheritance. I'm not blaming my parents, by the way, for a moment here. But I think the mindset that you've got to work hard to get anywhere, and you've just got to put your nose to the grind wheel and get on with it. I don't think that holds anymore. It used to, and it still does for short periods of time. We all have to do our accounts now and again. But as a life of work, I think we can have it both ways. I think we can have fun, we can do things that are valuable for society, and we can make money out of it. And I think that premise has been missing. And when it's in recent times, the more it's been missing, the worse the impact on the people around. So I think it's critical that we have to move beyond that paradigm.
Yes, I would say also that there is just a unique layer of when we say CEOs, obviously we're thinking of organizations that then are bringing in that CEO, or people that have created a business and then are assigning themselves CEO. I know people use that title fast and loose these days, but we're actually talking about actual CEOs. And I would say a lane next to them, which was more my experience, is when you're raised by parents who are entrepreneurs. I think there's, in that same way, there's a bit of a teaching of workaholicness. I know that's not a word, but because you learn very early on, there is no paid vacation. There is no second person who's going to stand in for you. Nobody's buying the, printing equipment, every single thing you have to do yourself. And so work, it's a whole other contextual layer of how you take work home with you, because it is in every fiber of every conversation. It's everywhere you look. Work, there's an opportunity to talk about work when you actually own that company and you're rising that up. And I think for those of us who've chosen entrepreneurialism, and I've shared about this before on the podcast, inside of the old paradigm of leadership and CEO and all of that, there has been pride that I've had in working myself to exhaustion. Pride I've had in sharing with other people and saying, oh, well, I've sacrificed this, this, and this. You say that you think this comes easy to me. It doesn't. Look how hard I've worked. And that was something that at some point a number of years ago was one of the things that I just stepped outside myself to look at and say, what are you so proud of? Why would you be so proud of the fact that you're not available to your son, that you cancel vacations or cancel time away with people, or to yourself, or commitments that you made to yourself at the last minute all the time, because this comes first? And finding my way through that was a bit of a rebirth, because it was not easy to let go of that. And I'm sure people will tell you I'm still a bit of a workaholic, but I see it and I know it, and I can start to build other nuances to my life. But like when you said, when we got together at the beginning of this conversation, you said it doesn't feel like work. And I think that's one of the biggest things, is when you are running a company as a leader and you are running your endeavors and you're passionate about it, there's also my life consists of more of this as well. And that's a great thing to examine. So I just wanted to add in that layer of entrepreneurs, because I think that we do think of CEOs a lot of times of, telling people what to do and then going out to the golf course themselves and having long lunches with cognac, but you don't hear about that with entrepreneurs. We couldn't afford to do that.
No, indeed. And there is an interesting phenomenon with entrepreneurs and I see this on a regular basis, where the amount of activity, which is worn as a badge of honor, deep down, once you start to peel back the layers, you can start to see it very much as a displacement activity, because it fills the void. It displaces some of the uncomfortable questions that we as human beings ultimately need to get to grips with. They don't have to be uncomfortable questions, but for some of us, some of the time they are. And I'll give you an example of one. Why am I doing this? What's the plan here? Where am I going with this? Who am I? What is my relationship to everyone around me? Where did I come from? Where am I going to? These existential questions, which don't have that they're not necessarily metaphysical, although they might be. They might have metaphysical answers. But as existential questions, they are deeply practical, and they bear examination. And what I've seen to a degree in myself earlier days, and certainly with others, is that intense activity gives us an opportunity to just put those important questions to one side as a kind of, well, not now, I'm busy. I'll do this when I've got a bit more time. When I'm at the end of my career and ready to change dimension. So I think that's an aspect of entrepreneurism that I see, particularly with those that are entrepreneurs that are intensely busy and justify it and wear it as a badge of honor.
I agree, and I think that's something to examine. I know the process that I myself informing myself is to ask myself, where did you get this behavior from? And inevitably, it like I can bring it down to a child of immigrants coming to America, having a business. What do they do? Work nonstop. I can point to certain things and I also am not blaming my parents, Chris. I also am not doing that. But I can point to things there, and then I can point to so many from people that I've worked with to people actually training me. That's the way that I'm supposed to interact, and to films and television that showed us, oh, that's when you get to that level of the food chain, that's how you interact with people. That's what you do. Those are the conflicts that you go through. That's what gets rewarded. And with those things informing me, one by one, sort of peeling away the layers and saying, where did you get that from? And then asking myself, is that something you want to keep? Because if you want to keep it, you've got to really own it as your own. And if you don't want to keep it, how can you start to transition out of it? Because when you are still leading and then you're going through your own metamorphosis, it requires a whole other level of communication to your team. Otherwise, they're like, what is happening right now? I don't know what is going on with this person that's leading us. To be transparent and say, hey, listen, I'm starting to deconstruct the ways that I have been leading. And I'm going to be changing some things, but I'm going to share them with you. And I'm going to share what I'm getting out of it and what the impact has been on me and potentially impact is on you. And I'd love to hear from you.
That's beautifully put, actually. And what it does for me is link aspects of leadership with personal development. Because, one of the slightly cliched things I like to trot out now and again is that leadership starts with self. In its purest form, it doesn't actually have a lot to do with anybody else. And when people say, well, what about poor old me? I'm not leading an organization. I don't even have a family. Where's my leadership? Well, we are all born with a life to lead. And
I agree.
That's where it starts. And, that's where you can cut your teeth on leadership. And really learn from that. I was about to say get it right, but I don't think that's the right expression. But you can you can certainly inform yourself a great deal and transfer those insights into leading people around you, very very often informally, friends and family, and then ultimately leading teams professionally and leading organizations.
Yes.
They're just the CEO of a multinational is just doing what we all can do but at a macro level. It's just scaled up a little bit, and the impact and the repercussions are a little bit bigger. But in essence, it comes down to that individual insight, and I think what you highlighted just now was the need for choice, for real choice, and not doing things according to a script. Whether they're right or not is neither here nor there. What's important is that we are choosing to do what we do and how we do it consciously.
Yes.
And becoming as fully aware as possible of the dynamics behind what we do and the implications for the wider society as well. And then you can really start to get into some interesting territory where things become alive. And I think it begins to tick that box, which I mentioned before, of fun, interest, passion, just being alive, because you become more and more conscious of your dynamics as a human being and your decision making as a leader.
Yes. You have about 7 points on your website that are around what the Broken CEO will show you how to. And I'd love to go through them because they're really, really great points. So one of the ones that you have is establish yourself as point of reference, your own source of wisdom and inspiration, which I kind of think we just touched on. But I will tell you that what it reminded me of was about 5 years ago, I stopped the dialogue in my life of role models. And it's interesting now as I'm a guest on other people's podcasts, inevitably something they'll say, oh, who are your role models? How did you put together your leadership style? I was like, well, that's interesting. You should ask me because I don't believe in role models. And I really don't. I think there are people, I will say, I admire people. I am inspired by people. I learn from people. In fact, I learn from a lot of people I do not agree with because it challenges me to think of, where is my thinking coming from? Is it just because they're not like me? But at the end of the day, what I look for behavior is either causing aliveness or it's killing aliveness. And to me, those are my two just check and balances. So if I say, well, why can't I be aggressive with somebody? I mean, sometimes you just got to be aggressive. I have to ask myself, is it going to create aliveness if I do? And if I can contextualize and frame it in that way and say, I'm going to actually step in and be aggressive, but I'm going to do it thoughtfully with an intention to cause something. Or as, the founder of our company, Pete Carroll, as an NFL coach will say, are you doing it from your heart? Because if you do things from your heart, even if it is tough, even if you are being tough with somebody, the outcome will be distinct because of where it's coming from. And you'll make different decisions, little nuanced decisions. And I truly believe that. But with role models, what I found was it was causing me to step outside myself, my own gut, my own instincts, and to compare myself to somebody. If I had a role model that now I noticed I was older, I realized, oh my gosh, that person's younger than me. I'll automatically, what'll be there is like, I should be doing more. I should have more. I should have accomplished more by now. Look at what they've done. If I see a role model that I had and that person has turned around something that I haven't become savvy with in terms of a skill set or how they accomplished a particular breakdown or catastrophe in their life, I start getting tough on myself. And that's kind of one of the first sort of doorways I walk through in transforming how I see leadership with myself, is to see all the places that I so desperately was seeking anything from outside of myself. Validation, approval, a kinship, acceptance, credit, reward. And those things became such a focus for me. If I just did the math and divided up my time, I could start to see that there was a small percentage of actually caring about people and really, truly getting up underneath that and building from there. And a larger focus was on myself. And this is where, and again, everybody could say, hey, what's wrong with that? I'm going to tell you, I don't really deal in right and wrong because this isn't a moral conversation to me. It's a functional conversation. But I'll tell you what doesn't work about that is, as a leader, when you're focused so keenly on yourself, it inherently, to me, is not even leadership. Because leadership inherently has a relationship to the cause and effect of one's own behavior on the people around you, because you are very clear. Your word, your being, your behavior has an impact that is like a ripple effect in water. It will go out days and weeks after that thing that you've just done, and it will affect people. It will affect their self-esteem. It will affect their relationship to themselves. It will affect their productivity. It will affect their purpose. And so I just got to highlight, this is what you said, establish yourself as your point of reference, your own source of wisdom and inspiration. Tell me more about that from your view.
Yeah, so I mean, as you were describing it so nicely and precisely, it reminded me that this is probably the number one bit of learning, I suppose, or insight that is so pertinent to leadership. And it's behind one of my taglines, which is leadership inside out. And it really is about the impact of diluting that inner reference by taking on or allowing external criteria to impact the way that you make decisions. Now, immediately that statement is open to challenge by anyone that says, well, hang on a minute, you have to take decisions based on the world around you, on what's happening. And that's absolutely true. And I wouldn't want to challenge that. However, as you've already alluded to, there is a choice. You can either look at the outside world and refer everything that you think, say, and do from that as a reference point, or many reference points. And that's another problem, of course, is that there is never one external reference point. There are always many. There's the multitude, the 10,000 things, as Lao Tzu would say, out there in the world. But in the inner world, there's only the one reference point, if you can tune into it. And that, I found, will guide you far more effectively, mysteriously as well, possibly, but more effectively and with more magic and excitement and interest and fun than anything else will. When you reference external data in this way, you can get yourself into big trouble. As you've brought some examples up, which certainly I have experienced personally, whereby, and the simplest one and the most insidious one is, well, what's so-and-so going to think about this? Or how is this director or that director going to react to this? What are the shareholders going to think about this? Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with posing that question. The problem comes when you allow those multitude of considerations external to you to dilute the inner compass of, this feels right or this doesn't feel right. And just to short circuit this whole debate, in a sense, I say this in the book, I don't think anyone puts it better than Shakespeare in Hamlet, I think it is, when he says, "To thine own self be true." That sums it up. And what he also says, I can't remember exactly, but essentially he says that if you're true to yourself, everything else will fall into place. And it does. It absolutely does. The problem is, the real challenge is that the intellect, the human intellect, cannot see far enough ahead to be quite certain and safe that it's going to turn out in the way that you want it to.
Oh my goodness, completely. And that I just want to throw in a very common, while it might be from the US, a very common thing that you hear around leaders as you're developing is this term, fake it till you make it, which is thrown in the box of this behavior. And I want to highlight that because let me just tell you, the outcome you're going to get from that is in the title, fake it till you make it. What kind of leader are you going to be? A fake one. That is what you're going to be. And people will find you aloof and that person thinks they're better than me. They're going to say a lot of things about you and it's going to confuse you because you're like, what are you talking about? I'm giving it everything I have. But the thing you didn't notice was you took on that ridiculous feedback, which is fake it until you make it. Why not just be transparent about your development as you're developing? I think that's a lot more powerful of a statement. But those are the many that have come into the type of leadership that is now breaking down. Okay, so another one is delegate the one thing most leaders won't let go of that holds everyone back. Tell us what it is. What is it, Chris?
The one thing. I'm sure everyone's very excited to know what that is, and will be slightly disappointed when they get the answer. But but that does not detract from its veracity one iota. Well, the common perception of delegation is to give somebody something to do, send them away, say, look, here's a job, go and do it. And in a sense, if only it were that simple and people actually did that. Because what happens in practice is that many leaders do indeed delegate the task, the activity, the job. But what they very often withhold, without even knowing it, is the ownership and the responsibility that goes with the task. And put crudely, it's the capacity to own and screw up.
I am Amber Rose Gill, your favourite Love Island winner and feminist, and this is Amazing Starts Here. I'm going to be telling the origin stories of real-life superheroes who are changing the world on their own terms, empowered by the National Lottery. Join me to hear inspiring takes from the lives of those who are fighting for truth, justice, and a better tomorrow. Follow Amazing Starts Here for a break from your regular podcasts. I'll see you there.
Because it's your task. Now, there's a great quote from General Patton. In fact, it's so good, I often think, is it one of these fake quotes? But I've tried to ascertain that it has come from him. And what he said was, don't tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do and let them surprise you with their ingenuity. And this is a Second World War military man. Yeah. Command and control. And that will take people, leaders, a very, very long way indeed, because it means that they are giving not just the activity to someone else, but they are giving permission to them to do it their way, to own it, to mess it up, to get it right, to learn from it, and to grow in the process. And this is the beauty of it, is that enables you to grow. If you don't delegate the responsibility and the ownership with the task, you're actually demeaning the individual and reducing them to the status of an automaton, because you're not allowing them to think for themselves. Now, what does that look like in practice? It could be anything from checking in on people all the time, asking them how they're getting on, asking them what's going right, what's going wrong. But more likely, it's micromanagement, where they are supervising, peering over your shoulder, and taking action to ensure that the job gets done according to your view as the leader. But of course, when you do that, you deny the individual the possibility of growth. And what happens as a long-term strategy, what will happen is that you as a leader will begin to surround yourself with people. You won't even do it consciously, it'll just happen. But you'll find yourself surrounded with people that cannot take on the responsibility and the ownership of tasks. They are people that you have to monitor, supervise, and micromanage, to the point where you can't do your job anymore because you're too busy making sure that everyone else is doing their job. And that renders the entire organization unscalable and unable to get beyond a certain limit of size and impact.
Well, you're right. It did deliver. It's not what anybody wants to hear, but it definitely delivered because, what brings to mind as you were crafting that and distinguishing it for us is really accountability. And the missing relationship to accountability is if who you're being as a leader is accountable, it's not your job then isn't holding everybody to be accountable. You're actually what you're doing. If you're authentically being that way, what you're actually doing is you're creating a team of accountable individuals. And if individuals are in fact accountable, they're self-generative. And that's a really important thing to look for, because, it's walking in and no matter what, you're an admin, you're a project manager, you're in HR, no matter what it is, you say, in what it is to be accountable is to have a sense of ownership in what it is that you are doing day to day. It's a really a strong touch point for me in interacting with the team is the minute anybody says, well, just tell me what to do and I'll just do it. Tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. And I'm like, no, I'll tell you what I want, but what I want to hear from you is what's your expression of that. Bring something to me that I wasn't anticipating, because you're you and I'm me. It doesn't matter the years that we've been around in our accountabilities. It's just the uniqueness of it. And in that, I have to say, Chris, is while so many people are talking about diversity and inclusion, one of the things that I've said was, if you actually have already some of the points that you brought in, if you're being this way as a leader, there's a natural state of inclusion and diversity that happens because you're invested in the unique perspective of every single person. And if you don't have a touch point with that person, you're definitely developing your other leaders to think and be that same way. And then there isn't a big tug of war of like, let's bring on 3 more brown people. I mean, that's not what you're going to be dealing with, because it's just obvious that you want a melange of expressions to be able to be as most innovative and creative as you possibly can.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is that you can take this one step further, as Steve Jobs did in his very famous, rather hackneyed quote these days, which I'm sure you're familiar with, when he said, we don't hire we don't hire good people to tell them what to do. We hire good people so they can tell us what to do. And then you start to turn the whole organization on its head, and you start to enable and encourage data, information, knowledge, and wisdom to flow both ways. And this is key and critical. And when you establish that, you transform the entire nature of the organization in a very, very exciting way, because then you're really tapping into the maximum that everyone is.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one of your points was master stress before it masters you. And this is another one where I say you really, really did predict something, because everything right now, if it's not about diversity and inclusion, everything is about stress. The level of stress that people are unanimously, globally contending with at this point right now, and the fallout of that stress over the number of years after, it has become something that is on the forefront of everyone's minds. People on teams that say, I'm exhausted. There isn't this, let's just keep going. There's now a very significant focus on, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to shift things? Maybe, I was talking to one organization a couple of months ago, and they said as soon as they feel that tension with the teams, they they have a setup where it's a Friday self-care day. So anybody on the team can call for it and say, okay, I'm calling this Friday self-care day. And if somebody calls it on the team, then they're all going to jump in and do it. And that's what's going to happen that Friday, because it's sort of like testing the climate of where the overall team is at. And if they're starting to get pressed and exhausted, then we're not going to be our best. We're not going to be able to think. And then now there's so much open research about that. What happens with the amygdala, what happens in that fight or flight state when we're stressed, that it shuts down the connections in our right and left hemisphere around being creative, around being innovative. So you're not going to make your best decisions. And a lot of the decisions we make are reactive, and reactive decisions typically under duress and come from a real place of fear, which is not how you want to be when you're creating something or making something happen. So you've definitely touched it on that. Boosting your performance with less effort. This is another one that I think is really important, that everybody in the organization kind of take their productivity and what they're doing and the structures they have and processes around it, and continuously run it through a sieve, meaning that you're constantly going to reevaluate whether or not things are efficient. Just because we did it that way before doesn't mean we should do it this way now. Technology is always changing. Maybe there's more people or less people on the team. You've always got to re-examine how things are going. So I love those. One of the ones that I would say is hands down, I would say not only vital and significant, if not the most important thing, but also so underachieved, which is clarify your personal and professional purpose to inspire and engage. And Pete and I talk about this a lot, where we can say, we can go to just about any room, any major organization, any successful person, or just somebody would just walk across and say, hey, tell me what your purpose is. And they would be like, what do you mean? Well, just tell me what your purpose is. Like, around what? Around my personal life? Well, either of them. And there's just kind of a long finding, if you will, of just adjunct pieces that they're pulling together. And I think it's so fascinating because this, to me, that personal and professional purpose also touches to your establish yourself as your point of reference. If you don't know your purpose, if you are not in tune with what calls you to be, then where do you go to register your decisions and your choices? It has to have some kind of benchmark to go back to say, oh, everyone is telling me this. All the other professionals are telling me this. There's something about it I don't agree with. Where am I going to go to make this decision? You're going to go to make that decision based on your purpose. Is that who you are? Can you authentically deliver it? And if you can't, then how you're going to say it as you go into, quote unquote, talk that board and the rest of the team into a buy-in, is you're going to come from that place and you're going to frame everything you say from that place. And I think that this has to be something that every single person you work with, they have to go and do this work of purpose. How has this been for you? And
yeah, well, I think the interesting thing about purpose is it's very very simple and rather attractive to think of it as something that you'll kind of suddenly discover. You'll open a box and there's my purpose. Now I get it. Exactly. And then suddenly, you're firing on all cylinders and life's a breeze. It may work like that for some people. Certainly it hasn't worked like that for me. And I don't think it's quite as binary and black and white as that. I think what happens in practice is that there is possibly even a lifelong process of discovery. I'll give you a very quick personal example. Years and years ago, long time ago, I would have been in my 20s, and I was engineering at the time. So I was designing, creating various technical systems. And an older guy I knew very well outside of work, a friend of mine, would tell me on occasion that I should be a teacher. I said, you're a teacher, you're a teacher. And it was the last thing I wanted to hear. I had very little time for, I should say respect, actually. I didn't really have much respect for the teaching profession. I certainly didn't want to go back to school to learn or to teach. I just wanted to do stuff in the lab, and I wasn't interested in telling other people how they should do things. So it was kind of the antithesis of where I was. If you ask me today what my purpose is, one of them is absolutely teaching. I cannot deny it. And I am comfortable with that now, but it's taken a hell of a long time. And it's only fairly recently that I could say to someone, well, one of my innate purposes is teaching, is explaining certain concepts to people that may not have made sense of them before. And that's what I do with my clients in a kind of generic way. There's very much that sense of teaching. So, and I find that's the case for a lot of my clients, that it's a gradual uncovering, a bringing into focus, rather than a bolt of lightning insight into purpose. And it's multifaceted as well. That's the other thing. As I said before, personally, the aspect of purpose, which is teaching, is by no means the only one. I won't bore you with the others, but there are many others, and so there will be with everyone, yourself included. So I think it's important to take that on so that we can manage expectations, because I don't want people thinking that until they discover their purpose, they're useless, because that's completely counterproductive and not the case.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that. I've never stated that, and that's something that I should take on to be responsible for, especially how emphatic I can get around purpose. And I think that is really important, because your purpose is still informing you, even though you haven't distinguished it. But the distinguishing of which will give you a level of clarity and velocity around your actions that you're not going to be privy to when you're not connected to it. And I like to tell people around finding, getting in tune with what their purpose is it really requires no outside interaction. It really is about listing and laying down and getting present to all the things that really pique and intrigue you. And it could be in films, it could be in other people. This is where role models come in, right? But it was something that I learned a long time ago, where somebody said, acknowledgments, the level of generosity and acknowledgments says more about yourself than the person you're acknowledging, because typically we acknowledge people for things that we actually have either dormant or that we have in ourselves. And so now if you take a look at yourself from that standpoint, who are the people that you revere? What are the qualities? You'll find out something about your purpose.
It's the outside world as a mirror. And once you can pick up on that a little bit, that can be tremendously helpful. I think the other thing that clarifying purpose is very important for, coming back to something you mentioned before, is resilience. You become far more better equipped to deal with the ups and downs, the vicissitudes of life, which will always be coming your way, because that's the nature of the world that we live in.
Yes.
But with a clarifying sense of purpose, I won't say a clear sense of purpose, because you may never feel that, but with a clarifying sense of purpose, the challenges you come across, the roadblocks, the bear traps, they can pale into insignificance if you're connected with some inner sense of purpose. And coming back to the process of uncovering that, I think there are two things that really point the way to an individual's sphere of purpose. And that is so simple. It's what you're good at and what you love doing. Mm-hmm. If you can start to shine a light on those two aspects, you can get a great deal out of that will help point you in the right direction. And if you don't know, you're going to know what you like doing, hopefully, but you may not be quite so clear on what you're good at. Ask somebody else. Ask people around you, friends, colleagues. Just sit them down and say, look, I need your help. I'm doing this little exercise on purpose. Yeah. What do you think I'm really good at? And the chances are you're going to be quite surprised, in a good way, as to some of the answers that you get.
I love that. And for somebody that has done that exercise a number of times myself, it is in fact scary, because you are concerned about what kind of things they're going to say that are going to be shameful to you. But that has more to do with the default place that we as human beings function, which is around shame. And I'll tell you that this old paradigm of leadership was baked into that as well, because to aggress people publicly, to berate them for not producing results, to relate to people as the results and not who they are, all of those things are baked in shame. Even the way they the time period in business development, it's like, oh, well, we know that we'll get more out of our salespeople if we put their numbers in front for everybody to see. So it's a form of shaming people in order to squeeze out something a little bit more. And again, that's where I say that I love that you brought up sustainability, because even if you can debate some of these points and say they're still beneficial, well, Audrey, if the board works, then we should keep it up. Yes, but think of it this way. It is a shortcut to a result that's a limited result. You could get so much more if you got invested in the points that, Chris, you're talking about. And you would have so much more depth, you'd have so much more breadth, and that means that you'd have so much more abundance in the kind of results that you could produce and in the ways that you could produce it. And I think people have to, right? And people have to remember also that as CEOs, as entrepreneurs, as founders, as whatever capacity of leadership, is that it's not just the revenue you bring in, it's also the money you lose. And you lose money in turnover. You lose money with productivity. You lose a lot of that. And those, I would say, in those areas where you're losing is where the old paradigm of leadership is now bankrupt.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very much agree with that.
So what is something that is really important that you want to be heard that I didn't ask you?
Okay, yeah, something has popped into mind, very relevant to everything you've mentioned, actually, but hasn't been articulated, and that is, let me take you back to a very kind of hackneyed expression, which we're all fed up with, I think, these days: work-life balance. Okay. And it's almost a given that we need to sort out our work-life balance, that it's a dichotomy. They are mutually exclusive. But when you examine the phrase, it doesn't make a lot of sense, because what it's suggesting is that if you're living, then you're not working. And if you're working, then you're not living. So in other words, if you're at work, you're dead. Now, clearly, that's nonsense. Although, having said that, I think we can all relate to that sense of feeling a little bit lifeless at work under certain conditions. We've probably all been there. But the reality is that work is life. And whether you enjoy it or not, it is a part of being alive in the society that we live in. But it's a false dichotomy. And the real dichotomy that needs to be considered very carefully is not between work and life, it's between work and rest, because work and rest are the polar opposites. And a lot of the issues in society that we get at the moment, and I'm thinking, you alluded to this before, the business of stress, the business of mental health, of resilience. As far as I can see, a lot of this is down to the fact that we do not honour or respect the need for real rest. Now, rest is one of those things that we all think we know what it is. You come home after a day's work, kick your shoes off, sit down in front of the telly or Netflix or whatever it is, have a drink, talk to your partner, go to the gym, have dinner, whatever it is. All of that is considered as rest because you are not actively working. But actually, it's not rest at all, because even though physically you might be more dormant and sedentary than during the day, mentally you're being constantly stimulated. So the point I want to make about this balance between work and rest is that we have to find, well, we don't have to, but it is unfathomably beneficial to all humans to find points of rest during the day which are not just physically restful, but emotionally, mentally, and, if you like, existentially restful. And those are very rare. Some people go through their entire lives without experiencing that kind of rest at all. And I have little doubt, I can't prove it, but I have little doubt that the issues we have around mental health these days are not helped by the fact that the sufferers do not get an opportunity for true rest. So what do I mean by true rest? Well, one of the things that I introduce to all my clients very early on in the programs that I run is a very, very simple practice of meditation, secular meditation that focuses on breath and breathing. But what it does is it's a discipline, if you like, which slows down the physical body. You have to sit down, close your eyes, but it also allows the mental and the emotional activity to subside, because the focus of attention is on something that generally it's never on at all. It's on the breath, just that very simple cycle of breathing in and out. And when you establish that kind of practice, daily practice, the effects can be, I was going to say miraculous. They can be, but more likely they are transformative on the individual, and their ability to see more clearly, to take better decisions, to remain emotionally stable, to have all hell breaking out around you, and yet to be a still point, unmoved, capable of responding to whatever's going on in a coherent and effective way, rather than reacting as a learnt pattern of behavior. So I think that's the one thing I would like to leave you with, this idea that we benefit tremendously from proper rest, and not the kind of rest that we normally associate with the word.
I love that you brought that up. And you're right. That's a whole 42 episodes in and of itself. I just love what you're up to, Chris. I just am really excited to have met you and had this dialogue with you. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of it as it gets introduced during this time, which is, I would say that it's a perfect time to have your work be front and center. So thank you for spending time with us.
Well, thank you. And I've loved the conversation. It's always delightful to speak with those that resonate with these insights. Let's put it like that, which clearly you do. So having this conversation makes me feel, as one person put it, I feel more intelligent when I'm speaking with you. I think that's that's been very true for me.
The Broken CEO, how to be the leader you always wanted to be. You can hear it. You can hear it emerging through the discussion with Chris and I. And I am delighted that conversation took place, because the more we find people that have been trafficking inside of these conversations about change, what it's going to look like and how we get there, the faster we can get there. And that's what this conversation with Unlikely Leadership is about. It's about accumulating information and sharing and insights around where we're going and what we're going to leave behind as we get there. So let's go through. I think it'd be powerful if I create each of these for you that he has around the Broken CEO. I told you there was 7 key ones that I mentioned. Let me go through each of them, okay? 1 is boost your performance with less effort, achieving more by doing less. Master stress before it masters you and compromises your well-being. Transform conflict, yours and others, into creative collaboration. Get the quality of rest you need for your best work with a clear and focused mind. Clarify your personal and professional purpose to inspire and engage. Delegate the one thing most leaders won't let go of that holds everyone back, which we talked about, was ownership, accountability. Establish yourself as your point of reference, your own source of wisdom and inspiration. Now, those are his 7 key points in how to become the leader you always wanted to be. and step outside of this broken CEO that he's speaking from. I recommend his book. I recommend this conversation. And I actually recommend you go through each of those 7 to know that you are in process. You are doing the work, or are at some point in doing the work to transform or transmute yourself through all of those 7. Because I think he just bang on mentioned each of those points so well. And I'm going to love to have a conversation with Chris at some point where some time has gone by, especially with this podcast as well, and what's been revealed, what's now working as people apply more and more of these more in tune, organic ways of operating as leadership. And I invite you to. And now let's make sure that we emphasize the degree to which he emphasized, which was rest. Full, complete understanding of what it is to rest yourself in order for you to be your best. And I think there's some really, really great, I know there's some really, really great information on this. And my recommendation to you, it's something that I'm still working through, but my recommendation to you is that you take the perspective as a leader that you are like a professional athlete. And professional athletes push themselves hard. They manage their mindset around not just their performance, but their mindset as well. And they manage their diet and their whole lifestyle around their athleticism. And they have a relationship with rest that's unique to those of us that are just pushing our bodies to do things that is outside of their ability, and also is not giving us our best performance. So if you take on that perspective, it's going to change the way that you see rest. Instead of something that you are cheating yourself out of and negotiating yourself out of, it is something that you know is vital to your performance, especially your prime performance. Okay, like always, you can find out more about Chris on our website, www.amplifyvoices.io. Things about me, Pete, more episodes. You can read the episodes. There's videos to watch, all kinds of great things on that website. You can come check it out. It's www.amplifyvoices.io. Thank you.